The cabin door exploded inward during the blizzard, and Evelyn Mercer stumbled through with a dying man twice her size collapsed across her shoulders. Blood froze black against the snow. Her hands had gone numb miles ago. Behind her, somewhere in that screaming darkness, men with guns were still hunting. This wasn't supposed to be her life. 3 months ago, she'd been a respectable woman in St. Louis. Now she was dragging a scarred stranger she'd married for survival across a mountain that wanted them both dead, and the past she'd run from had finally caught up. If you want to know how a disgraced woman and a broken mountain man fought their way through lies, violence, and a wilderness that showed no mercy, stay with me until the end. Hit that like button and drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. This is their story, and it starts with a bargain that should have stayed simple. Gideon Hale didn't believe in second chances. Not anymore. He sat alone in his cabin 6,000 feet above the world, staring at the letter he'd written and rewritten 17 times. Outside, November wind screamed through the pines like something dying. Inside, silence pressed against him the way it had for 3 years. Heavy, familiar, suffocating. The advertisement had appeared in the Denver Post 2 months earlier. Mountain trapper seeks practical woman for marriage. No romance. Hard work required. Write to Gideon Hale, Iron Creek, Colorado Territory. He'd received 4 responses. 3 were from women who clearly had no idea what mountain winters actually meant. They wrote about fresh starts and building dreams together, their words soft and useless as summer rain. He burned those letters without answering. The 4th was different. Mr. Hale, I won't waste your time with pleasantries. I need a way out of St. Louis, and you need help surviving your mountain. I can work. I can learn. I don't expect kindness, and I won't offer what I can't give. If you're serious about this arrangement, send fare for the Western Railway. If not, burn this letter and forget I wrote. E. Mercer. No flowery language, no false promises, just honesty sharp enough to cut. Gideon had studied that letter for a week before finally sending the money. Now, waiting for a woman he'd never met to arrive in Iron Creek, he wondered if he'd made a mistake. Probably. But mistakes were familiar territory. He'd been making them since the war ended and left him with nothing but scars and a brother's grave he couldn't visit. The mountain had been his escape. Turned out you couldn't outrun ghosts, but at least up here they were the only company. He stood, joints cracking in the cold. 40 years old, and he moved like 50. The mirror above his wash basin showed what the years had done. Face carved hard by weather and grief, a scar cutting from his left eyebrow to his jaw, where a Confederate bayonet had nearly taken his eye, hair going gray at the temples. Not a face that inspired trust, definitely not one that inspired love. Good. He wasn't looking for love. He was looking for survival, plain and simple. Someone to help haul water before the well froze solid. Someone to tend the trap line when his back gave out. Someone to split firewood and smoke meat and make sure when winter finally killed him, at least the cabin wouldn't stand empty. Romance was for people who still believed life owed them happiness. Gideon knew better. He pulled on his heavy coat, checked his rifle, and started the long ride down to Iron Creek. The woman, E. Mercer, whoever she was, would arrive on the afternoon stage from Denver. They'd exchange vows in front of the territorial judge, sign the papers, and head back up the mountain before dark. Simple, practical, honest. Everything his first attempt at love hadn't been. The ride down took 4 hours. Black Ash Mountain didn't give up its secrets easily, and the trail switchbacked through terrain that killed careless travelers every winter. Gideon had made this journey 1,000 times, knew every boulder and deadfall, every place where the path crumbled toward empty air. He passed the burned remains of the Hutchins cabin around noon. Fire had taken them last February, whole family gone in a single night. The chimney stood alone now, a stone finger pointing at indifferent sky. Nobody had claimed the land since. Nobody would. The mountain took what it wanted. Iron Creek appeared below him just after 1 o'clock, a rough collection of buildings clinging to existence in a narrow valley. Maybe 200 people when you counted the miners, the gamblers, the women who worked the saloon, and the families stubborn enough to believe civilization could take root this far from anywhere that mattered. Gideon had no illusions about the place. It was hard and mean, same as everywhere else, but it had a general store, a blacksmith, and a judge who didn't ask too many questions. That was enough. He tied his horse outside Brennan's saloon and walked toward the stage office. Men watched him pass with the careful neutrality mountain towns reserved for people who wanted to be left alone. Gideon had earned his isolation. 3 years without causing trouble. 3 years of trading furs and buying supplies and never staying longer than necessary. They knew his name. They knew about the war. They knew enough to let him be. The stage office smelled like tobacco and old paper. Marcus Webb, the station agent, looked up from his ledger and nodded once. Hail. Webb. Stage on time. Came in 20 minutes ago. Webb's expression shifted slightly. Your arrangement. She's at the boarding house. Mrs. Brennan took her in when she arrived. Something in the man's voice made Gideon stop. Problem? Not my place to say. Webb returned to his ledger. She's paid through tonight. Judge Hartwell said he'd meet you at his office whenever you're ready. Gideon studied the man's careful face, reading what wasn't being said. Already then. Already the talk had started. He'd expected it. A mail-order bride always drew attention, but he'd hoped for at least a few hours before the gossip began. Thanks, he said, and walked out. The boarding house sat 2 buildings down, a sagging structure that somehow stayed standing despite looking ready to collapse. Gideon climbed the steps and knocked. Mrs. Brennan answered, a rail-thin woman with eyes that saw everything and forgave nothing. She looked him over the way she might examine spoiled meat. Mr. Hale. Ma'am, I'm here for... I know why you're here. She didn't move from the doorway. That girl's been through something. I don't know what, but I got eyes. You planning to make things worse for her? Planning to marry her, if she's still willing. Marriage don't mean protection. Not always. No, Gideon agreed quietly. It doesn't. Something in his honesty seemed to satisfy her because she stepped aside. Room at the end of the hall. Knock first. He found the door and knocked twice. Silence, then footsteps. The door opened 6 inches. The woman standing there wasn't what he'd expected. She was younger than he'd imagined, mid-20s maybe, with dark hair pulled back severely and eyes that had seen too much too quickly. Exhaustion had carved shadows under those eyes. Her dress was decent but worn, mended in places with careful stitches that spoke of pride and limited resources. But it was her hands that caught his attention, raw and blistered, nails broken, fingers wrapped in makeshift bandages. She saw him notice and didn't hide them. Mr. Hale. Her voice matched her letter, direct, careful, guarded. Miss Mercer. They stood there studying each other across the threshold like opponents checking for weakness. Gideon saw intelligence in her eyes, and wariness, and something else he recognized because he carried it himself. Damage. The stage was delayed, she said finally. There was an accident. Washed-out bridge near Canyon Falls. We had to... She stopped, seemed to reconsider. It doesn't matter. I'm here. You hurt? Nothing that won't heal. More silence. This wasn't going the way Gideon had imagined, though he wasn't sure what he'd imagined. Some part of him had expected this to feel more like a business transaction. Simple, clear, unemotional. Instead, it felt like standing on a ledge in the dark, unable to see what waited below. Judge is ready whenever we are, he said. You still want to go through with this? Evelyn Mercer looked at him for a long moment. Whatever she was searching for in his scarred face, she must have found something acceptable because she nodded once. I need 10 minutes. I'll wait downstairs. She closed the door quietly. Gideon descended to the boarding house parlor and stood by the window, watching Iron Creek move through its afternoon. Miners heading to the claims, women carrying laundry, a dog sleeping in the street. Normal life, or as normal as life got this far from civilization. Mrs. Brennan appeared beside him, silent as smoke. She tell you what happened on that stage? Said there was an accident. Accident. Mrs. Brennan's mouth tightened. Bridge gave way, dropped them 30 feet into a flooding canyon. Driver broke his leg in 3 places, passengers panicking, screaming, water rising. That girl pulled the driver out of the wreckage and kept him alive through the night while everyone else fell apart. 14 hours in freezing water before help arrived. Gideon turned to look at her. Nobody's talking about that, though, Mrs. Brennan continued. They're too busy talking about other things. Why a respectable woman would answer an advertisement like yours? what she might be running from. You know how people are. I know. Do you? She met his eyes directly. Because that girl's going up your mountain with you, and once you're up there, she's got nobody but you between her and whatever comes. You understand that? I understand. Make sure you do. Mrs. Brennan walked away, leaving Gideon alone with his thoughts. 15 minutes later, Evelyn descended the stairs wearing the same dress, but with her hair reorganized and her few possessions packed in a battered traveling bag. She'd wrapped her damaged hands in fresh bandages. I'm ready. They walked to Judge Hartwell's office in silence. Iron Creek watched them pass with barely concealed interest. Gideon heard the whispers starting, saw the eyes following Evelyn's progress down the street. Let them talk. Talk was all they had up here. Judge Hartwell was a gray-haired man who'd come west after his wife died, looking for a place where the past couldn't find him. He understood about running. His office smelled like whiskey and old law books. Mr. Hale, Miss Mercer. He gestured to the chairs in front of his desk. I assume you both understand what you're doing here. We understand, Gideon said. Miss Mercer, you're entering this marriage of your own free will? No coercion? Yes. You understand that marriage in this territory is legally binding? You'll be bound to this man, and he to you, under territorial law? I understand. Hartwell looked at them both carefully. I'm required to ask if there's any impediment to this marriage. Previous marriages, legal obligations, anything that would make this union invalid? No, Evelyn said. No, Gideon echoed. Then let's proceed. The ceremony took 7 minutes. Hartwell read the required words in a flat, practiced voice. Gideon repeated his vows, staring at a water stain on the wall. Evelyn's voice never wavered, but her bandaged hands trembled slightly when she signed the marriage certificate. By the power vested in me by the territory of Colorado, I pronounce you husband and wife. Hartwell pushed the certificate across his desk. God help you both. Outside, the sun had started its descent toward the peaks. They had maybe 3 hours of daylight left. We should move, Gideon said. Trail's dangerous after dark. Evelyn nodded. She'd barely spoken since the ceremony. They stopped at the general store for supplies Gideon had ordered earlier. Flour, salt, ammunition, kerosene. While he loaded the pack mule, Evelyn stood in the street looking up at Black Ash Mountain rising against the sky. From here, it looked almost beautiful, distant and blue and peaceful. She'd learn different soon enough. You ride? Gideon asked. Not well. You'll be on the mule then, steadier than a horse on mountain trails. He helped her up, noticed how she winced when his hands touched her waist, and they started north out of Iron Creek. The town watched them leave in silence. For the first hour, they climbed through scrub pine and granite outcroppings. The trail was wide enough here that they could ride side by side, but neither spoke. Gideon had spent so long alone that conversation felt unnatural, and Evelyn seemed locked inside her own thoughts. The temperature dropped as they gained elevation. Evelyn pulled her thin coat tighter. It wasn't nearly heavy enough for where they were going. There's a better coat in the cabin, Gideon said. Belonged to... He stopped. It'll fit you. She glanced at him, curious about what he'd almost said, but didn't push. Around the second hour, the trail narrowed and grew steeper. Below them, the valley dropped away into nothing. One wrong step, and gravity would finish the conversation permanently. Stay behind me, Gideon instructed. Watch where I go. Don't look down. Evelyn's face had gone pale, but she nodded. They navigated the switchbacks in tense silence, mule hooves finding purchase on loose stone. Gideon had made this climb hundreds of times, but it never stopped being dangerous. The mountain didn't care about experience. As they crested the ridge where the burned Hutchins cabin stood, Evelyn finally broke the silence. What happened here? Fire. Last winter. The family? Didn't make it. She stared at the ruined chimney. How far to your cabin? Another hour. And if something happens, if we get hurt or trapped, we handle it ourselves. He didn't say the rest. That up here you survived or you didn't, and help was a 3-day ride away in good weather. She'd figure that out quick enough. The sun touched the horizon as they finally approached the cabin. It sat in a small clearing surrounded by pines, backed against a granite cliff face that provided shelter from the worst winds. Smoke-stained logs, a stone chimney, shuttered windows, a lean-to for the animals. Small, rough, honest. Home, such as it was. Gideon dismounted and helped Evelyn down. She stood staring at the cabin, probably seeing it for what it really was, a survival box perched on the edge of nowhere. "It's not much," he said. "No," she agreed quietly. "It's not." He showed her inside. One main room with a fireplace, a cooking area, a rough table, 2 chairs, a smaller room in back with the bed, shelves holding supplies, traps hanging on the walls, everything functional, nothing decorative. "Well's behind the cabin," he explained. "Privy's 30 yards east, marked with stones. Wood for the fire is stacked under the lean-to, but we'll need to cut more before the heavy snows. Food storage is in the—" "Mr. Hale." Evelyn's voice stopped him. "I need to know something." He waited. "What exactly are you expecting from this arrangement?" Gideon studied her carefully. "Work, survival, someone who won't quit when winter gets hard." And at night, there it was. The question hanging between them since Denver. "There's only one bed," he said slowly, "but I've got blankets. I can sleep by the fire until you're comfortable with whatever this becomes." Something in her face shifted. Relief, maybe, or surprise. "You'd do that?" "I'm not looking to force anything. You came here because you needed out of wherever you were. I needed help staying alive. That's the arrangement." "That's unusual." "Maybe. But it's honest." Evelyn looked around the cabin again, seeing it differently now. "All right, then." "All right." They worked together to settle the animals and unload supplies. Evelyn moved carefully, learning the space, asking questions about where things belonged. Her bandaged hands made everything harder, but she didn't complain. When the work was done and the fire built, Gideon made a simple meal: salt pork, beans, coffee strong enough to strip paint. They ate in silence at the rough table. Finally, Evelyn spoke. "The accident Mrs. Brennan mentioned. The bridge." "Don't have to talk about it." "I want to." She set down her fork. "We were crossing Canyon Falls when the bridge supports gave way, dropped us into the river. The current was—" She stopped, remembering. People were screaming. The driver, Mr. Patterson, his leg was broken badly, bone showing through. Everyone else was panicking, trying to get out of the water, scrambling for shore. "But you didn't." "I couldn't leave him there. So I got him out of the coach and onto a rock above the waterline. Kept him warm as I could through the night. Kept him talking so he wouldn't pass out and drown. That's where the hands came from." She looked down at the bandages. The rocks were sharp, and the water was cold. I didn't really notice at the time. Gideon understood. He'd seen it in the war. People who functioned through trauma without feeling pain until the crisis passed. Then it hit like a hammer. "Patterson lived?" "He lived. Rescue party found us the next morning." She met his eyes. "But by the time we reached Iron Creek, the story had changed. People weren't talking about the rescue anymore. They were asking why I was traveling alone, why I'd answered an advertisement, what I might be running from." "Are you running from something?" A long pause, then quietly, "Yes." "Want to tell me what?" "Not yet." She stood, started gathering the dishes. "Maybe not ever. Is that going to be a problem?" Gideon considered. Everyone up here was running from something. The mountain was full of ghosts and people trying to escape them. He had no right to judge. "No," he said. "It's not a problem." They cleaned up together, establishing a rhythm without discussing it. Evelyn washed while Gideon dried and put things away. Outside, darkness had swallowed the mountain completely. "You should take the bed," Gideon said. "I'll be fine by the fire." "That's not—" "I've slept in worse places." She didn't argue further. He gave her privacy to change while he checked the door and windows, making sure everything was secured against the night. When he returned, she was already under the blankets in the back room, fully dressed, facing the wall. Gideon built up the fire and arranged his bedroll on the floor nearby. The cabin was small enough that he could hear her breathing from the other room, quick and shallow at first, gradually slowing as exhaustion finally won. He lay awake for a long time, staring at the ceiling beams and wondering what exactly he'd brought into his life. A woman with damaged hands and secrets, a stranger who'd pulled a dying man from a river while everyone else ran. Not what he'd expected. Maybe that wasn't a bad thing. Outside, wind moved through the pines with a sound like distant voices. Somewhere up the mountain, a wolf howled into the darkness. Gideon closed his eyes and let the familiar sounds pull him toward sleep. Tomorrow they'd start learning how to survive together. Tonight, they were just two broken people sharing space at the edge of the world, trying not to let the ghosts in. The first week passed in hard work and careful distance. Gideon taught Evelyn the basics of mountain survival, how to read weather in the clouds, how to conserve firewood, how to walk the trapline without getting lost. She learned quickly, asked smart questions, never complained even when the thin air left her gasping. Her hands healed slowly. The bandages came off after 4 days, revealing pink new skin that would scar. She didn't seem bothered by it. They developed routines. Gideon rose before dawn to check the traps. Evelyn managed the cabin, fire, meals, repairs to equipment. They worked until exhausted, spoke only when necessary, maintained the careful distance of people who'd chosen practicality over connection. At night, Gideon slept by the fire. Never complained, never asked for more. On the 8th day, the first real snow arrived. Gideon woke to white silence and knew immediately this wasn't a dusting. This was the beginning of winter proper, the season that would trap them here until spring. Evelyn emerged from the back room and stopped at the window, staring at snow already knee-deep and still falling. How long will this last? Hard to say. Could be days. Could be weeks. And we're stuck here? We're stuck here. She absorbed this quietly. Gideon waited for panic, for regret, for the breakdown he'd seen in other people who suddenly understood what mountain winter really meant. Instead, Evelyn just nodded. Then we'd better make sure we have enough wood. They spent the day hauling everything under cover: wood, supplies, tools. The work was brutal in the deepening snow, but they pushed through it together. By nightfall, they were exhausted and soaked and ready to collapse. Gideon built the fire high, while Evelyn changed into dry clothes. He stripped off his wet shirt and was reaching for a dry one when he heard her sharp intake of breath. He'd forgotten about the scars. They covered his back in a map of old violence: bullet wounds, knife marks, the places where field surgeons had dug metal from his flesh and sewn him back together roughly. The war had written its history on his skin in permanent ink. "I'm sorry," Evelyn said quietly. "I didn't mean to stare." "It's fine." He pulled on the dry shirt quickly. "You were going to see eventually." "The war?" "Most of them." She didn't ask for details. He appreciated that. They ate dinner in silence that felt different somehow, less guarded, more companionable. The storm howled outside, shaking the cabin, but inside felt warm and safe. After the meal, Evelyn surprised him by pulling out a small book from her traveling bag. "Do you read, Mr. Hale?" "Some. Not much out here to read besides trapping guides." "Would you mind if I read aloud? It helps pass the time." He almost said no. Reading felt too intimate somehow, too much like connection. But the alternative was sitting in silence, listening to the storm, and something about her voice made him curious. "Go ahead." She opened the book and began to read. Some novel about London and families and social complications that meant nothing up here but somehow mattered in the world she'd left behind. Her voice was steady and clear, bringing the distant story to life in their small cabin. Gideon found himself listening not to the words but to her, the way she changed tone for different characters, the small smile when she reached a part she particularly enjoyed, the comfort she seemed to find in the familiar story. When she finally closed the book an hour later, he realized he'd been leaning forward, drawn in despite himself. "Thank you," he said. She looked surprised. "I can read more tomorrow night if you'd like." "I'd like." That became their new routine. After dinner, while the fire burned low, Evelyn would read and Gideon would listen, and the silence between them filled with stories instead of ghosts. The storm lasted 4 days. By the end, they'd run through nearly a quarter of the firewood and most of the fresh food. But they'd also learned something important. They worked well together. Evelyn didn't panic. Gideon didn't isolate. They'd survived their first real test as partners. On the 5th day, the snow stopped and weak sunlight broke through. Gideon went out to check the trapline and found 3 rabbits frozen in the snares. When he returned, Evelyn had bread baking and coffee ready. "We'll need to smoke this meat," he said, laying the rabbits on the table. "Make it last." "Show me how." He did. They worked side by side, Evelyn learning to skin and prepare the meat while Gideon built the smoking frame. Her hands had healed enough to handle the knife, though she moved carefully. "Where did you learn all this?" she asked. "War, mostly. Before that, my brother and I—" He stopped. "You had a brother?" "Had. Past tense." Gideon hadn't meant to say it. "James, younger by 2 years. What happened to him?" The question sat between them like a physical thing. Gideon had spent 3 years not talking about James, not thinking about how it ended, keeping it locked away where memory couldn't destroy him. But something about Evelyn's quiet presence made the words come out despite his best defenses. "He died at Antietam, under my command." She stopped working, waiting. "I was his lieutenant, kept him close, thought I could protect him. But when the fighting started, everything went to hell. I sent him with a message to the rear lines." Gideon's hands tightened on the smoking frame. "He never made it. Confederate artillery found him halfway there. They said it was quick. They said he didn't suffer." "But you don't believe that." "I don't know what to believe. I just know he's gone, and I'm the one who sent him." Evelyn's voice was gentle. "That's not the same as killing him." "Isn't it?" They worked in silence for a while after that. Finally, Evelyn spoke again. "I had a sister, younger by 3 years. Scarlet fever took her when she was 12. I was supposed to be watching her that day, but I'd snuck out to meet a boy I liked. By the time I got back, she was burning up with fever. She died 2 days later." Gideon looked at her. "That wasn't your fault, wasn't it?" She echoed his words back to him. "I spent years believing it was. Eventually, I realized guilt doesn't change what happened. It just makes you carry the weight twice, once for the loss, once for the blame." "You let it go?" "I'm trying to. Some days are easier than others." Gideon understood that. Some days he could think about James without drowning. Other days, the weight came back like fresh grief. They finished smoking the meat without more conversation, but something had shifted. They'd traded pieces of their histories, small fragments of the damage they carried. It didn't fix anything, but it made the space between them feel less empty. That night, another storm rolled in, colder than the first, meaner. The temperature dropped until frost formed on the inside of the windows. Evelyn emerged from the bedroom, shivering despite wearing every piece of clothing she owned. "The back room's freezing," she said. "I can see my breath." Gideon checked the fire, added more wood, but he knew the truth. The cabin was small and poorly insulated. In weather like this, heat bled away fast. The back room, furthest from the fireplace, would only get colder. "You'll have to sleep out here," he said, "near the fire." "Where will you sleep?" "Same place. We'll manage." But as the night deepened and the temperature kept dropping, managing became harder. Evelyn huddled in her blankets near the fire, teeth chattering. Gideon lay on the opposite side, far enough away to maintain distance, close enough to share the warmth. It wasn't enough. Around midnight, Evelyn's shivering woke him. He could hear her trying to stay quiet, trying not to bother him, but the cold was winning. Gideon lay there staring at the ceiling, knowing what he had to suggest and hating the awkwardness of it. "Evelyn, I'm fine." "You're not. And if you freeze to death, I'll never hear the end of it from Mrs. Brennan." He sat up. "We need to share warmth, properly." Silence. Then, "What does that mean?" "It means we combine the blankets and sleeping rolls, lie close enough to share body heat. It's survival, not—" He stopped. "It's just survival." More silence. He waited for her to refuse, to say she'd rather risk freezing than trust him that much. Instead, she said quietly, "All right." They arranged the blankets together, creating a single warm space. Gideon lay down first, on his side facing the fire. Evelyn settled behind him, a careful 6 inches of distance maintained. "You need to be closer," he said. "Won't work otherwise." She shifted forward until her back pressed against his. Even through layers of clothing, he could feel her trembling. They lay like that in rigid silence, both hyper-aware of every point of contact, every breath. Slowly, the shared warmth built. Evelyn's shivering eased. Gideon felt the tension in his shoulders begin to loosen. Outside, the storm raged. Inside, 2 strangers who'd married for survival lay back to back in front of a dying fire, trying to remember how to trust another human being. Just before sleep took him, Gideon felt Evelyn's hand reach back and find his in the darkness. Her fingers were still cold. He closed his hand around hers carefully. Neither of them spoke. Neither of them let go. And somewhere in that small gesture, something changed between them that neither would recognize until much later, when the mountain tested them in ways that made a cold night seem gentle, and survival meant more than just staying alive. Morning came with frost thick on the windows, and neither of them willing to acknowledge what had happened in the night. Gideon woke first, carefully extracting himself from the tangle of blankets without disturbing Evelyn. His hand still remembered the feel of hers, small, calloused, surprisingly strong. He pushed the thought away and rebuilt the fire. By the time Evelyn stirred, he had coffee brewing and was already halfway through sharpening his knives for the day's work. She sat up, hair disheveled, cheeks flushed from sleep and warmth, and for a moment neither of them spoke. "Thank you," she finally said. "For last night. Had to be done. Still, thank you." They fell back into their careful routines, but something had shifted. The distance they'd maintained felt thinner now, more fragile. They moved around each other differently, not quite comfortable, but not strangers anymore either. The cold snap lasted another week. Every night they shared warmth by the fire. Every morning they pretended it meant nothing. But Gideon noticed the way Evelyn stopped flinching when he came near. Noticed how she'd started leaving her coffee cup next to his by the wash basin. Small things. Meaningless things. Except they weren't meaningless at all. On the 9th day, the temperature finally broke enough for Gideon to check the trap line properly. He left before dawn with his rifle in his pack, promising to return before dark. "Be careful," Evelyn said from the doorway. "Always am." "I mean it. If something happens to you up here, I wouldn't—" She stopped. "Just be careful." Gideon looked at her, standing there in the doorway, wrapped in the coat he'd given her, and felt something uncomfortably close to warmth in his chest. He nodded once and headed into the snow. The trapline ran 3 miles in a rough circle around the cabin, marked by blazes on the trees that only someone who knew what to look for could find. Gideon walked it slowly, checking each snare, resetting what needed resetting, taking what the mountain had provided. 2 rabbits. 1 marten, with a pelt that would bring decent money come spring. Not bad for a week of storms. He was resetting the last trap when he heard voices. Gideon froze, listening. Male voices, at least 3 of them, coming from the direction of the eastern ridge. Nobody should be up here. The nearest claim was 5 miles south, and nobody worked them in winter. He moved quietly toward the sound, rifle ready. Through the trees, he spotted them. 4 men on horseback, picking their way along a game trail that would eventually lead them close to the cabin. They didn't look like miners. Too well dressed, too well armed. The one in front wore a long coat that probably cost more than most people up here made in a year. Gideon stayed hidden, watching. The men stopped about 200 yards from where he crouched. "You sure this is the right area?" one of them called out. Tribune said Black Ash Mountain. The well-dressed one consulted a piece of paper. "Trapper named Hale. Can't be too many of those up here." Gideon's blood went cold. "What do we do when we find her?" another asked. "Confirm identity first, then we bring her back. Crow wants this handled quietly." "And if she doesn't want to come?" The well-dressed man smiled. "Then we make it very clear she doesn't have a choice." They kept talking, but Gideon had heard enough. They were looking for Evelyn. Someone named Crow had sent them, and they planned to take her whether she agreed or not. He waited until they moved on before slipping back through the trees toward the cabin. His mind raced. Evelyn had said she was running from something. He'd assumed debt, maybe, or a bad situation with family. Not this. Not men with money and guns who tracked people across territory lines. What the hell had she done? He reached the cabin just as the sun hit its highest point. Evelyn looked up from the table where she'd been mending one of his shirts, saw his face, and stood immediately. "What's wrong?" "We need to talk. Now." He shut the door, checked the window, then turned to face her. "There are men looking for you. 4 of them. Armed. They mentioned someone named Crow." All the color drained from Evelyn's face. She sat down heavily, like her legs had stopped working. "How far away?" 2 miles. Maybe less. "They don't know exactly where the cabin is, but they're looking." Gideon set his rifle against the wall. "You want to tell me what this is about?" She stared at her hands for a long moment. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. His name is Victor Crow. He owns half of St. Louis, factories, banks, railroads. I worked in his household as a governess for his children. What happened? He decided he wanted more than a governess. Evelyn's hands clenched into fists. He made advances. I refused. He didn't take it well. Gideon felt anger building in his chest. He hurt you? He tried. I fought back, broke his nose with a candlestick. Something fierce flashed in her eyes at the memory. But Victor Crow isn't a man who accepts humiliation. He told everyone I'd stolen from him, forged documents proving it, had the police looking for me within days. So you ran. What choice did I have? His word against mine, and he owned the judge, the police, half the lawyers in the city. She looked up at Gideon. I took what money I'd saved and bought a train ticket as far as it would take me. Saw your advertisement in a Denver paper. Figured if I was going to disappear, I should disappear somewhere nobody would think to look. Except they did look. He must have had people watching the marriage registries. It's the kind of thing he'd do. Patient, thorough, relentless. Her voice cracked slightly. I'm sorry. I should have told you before we married. You had a right to know. Gideon walked to the window, staring out at the snow-covered clearing. Those men would find the cabin eventually. Maybe not today, maybe not tomorrow, but soon. And when they did, they'd try to take Evelyn. The law was on their side. Forged or not, those documents made her a fugitive. He could let them take her, save himself the trouble. He'd fulfilled his part of the bargain, married her, brought her up the mountain. What happened after wasn't his problem, except it was his problem now. He turned back to face her. We're not giving you to them. Evelyn looked up, surprised. What? You heard me. You're my wife, legal and proper. That means you're under my protection. Those men want you. They'll have to go through me first. Gideon, they'll kill you if you get in their way. They can try. He pulled his rifle from the wall, checked the ammunition. But they don't know this mountain like I do, and winter's coming in hard again. I can feel it in the air. If we're smart, we can outlast them. Why would you do this? You barely know me. Good question. Gideon asked himself the same thing. The smart move was to cut his losses, maybe even collect whatever reward Crow was offering. But when he tried to imagine handing Evelyn over to those men, something in him recoiled. Maybe it was the way she'd held that dying stage driver through a freezing night. Maybe it was how she'd pulled him back from his ghosts without even trying. Maybe it was just that he was tired of letting bad men take what they wanted without consequences. Because it's the right thing to do, he said finally. And because you're mine now, I take care of what's mine. Evelyn stood and crossed to him. Without warning, she reached up and touched his scarred face gently. You're a better man than you think you are. Don't count on it. But he didn't pull away from her touch. We need to prepare. They'll come eventually. They spent the rest of the day fortifying the cabin. Gideon showed Evelyn how to load and fire his spare rifle, how to bar the door properly, where to position herself if shooting started. She learned quickly, hands steady despite the fear he could see in her eyes. As darkness fell, Gideon went outside one more time to scout. No sign of the men yet, but he found fresh tracks near the eastern approach. They were getting closer. Inside, Evelyn had made dinner, though neither of them had much appetite. They ate in tense silence, listening to every sound outside. Wind in the trees, snow sliding off the roof, normal sounds that suddenly felt threatening. Tell me about the war, Evelyn said suddenly. I want to know. Why? Because if we're going to fight together, I should know who I'm fighting beside. Gideon set down his fork. Nobody had asked him about the war in years. Most people who'd been through it didn't want to talk, and people who hadn't didn't want to hear. What do you want to know? What it was like, what you did, how you survived. He stared into the fire, remembering. It was hell. Not the dramatic kind you read about in books. Just constant grinding misery, fear and boredom in equal measure, broken up by moments of pure terror when the shooting started. You were an officer? Lieutenant, field commission after the first year. I was good at keeping men alive, so they kept promoting me. His voice turned bitter. Until I wasn't good at it anymore. Your brother. And others. I led a company of 43 men into the wilderness. 11 walked back out. He met her eyes. You learn things about yourself in war, what you're capable of, what you're willing to do to survive. And what did you learn? That I'm very good at killing, that I can make hard choices without hesitating, that when it matters, I don't freeze. He paused. I also learned that survival isn't the same as living. Took me 3 years on this mountain to figure that out. Evelyn reached across the table and took his hand. I'm glad you survived. Are you? Yes, because otherwise you wouldn't be here, and I'd be facing those men alone. They sat there holding hands across the rough table while the fire burned low. Outside, the temperature dropped and the wind picked up. Another storm was building. We should sleep, Gideon said. Storm's coming in. They won't move in weather like this. That night they didn't pretend. They arranged the blankets together near the fire, lay down side by side, and when Evelyn shivered despite the warmth, Gideon pulled her closer without asking. She fit against him like she'd been carved for that exact space. Her head rested on his shoulder, his arm wrapped around her waist, both of them hyper-aware that this was something more than survival now. Gideon? Her voice was quiet in the darkness. Yeah? Thank you for not asking if I actually stole from him. Did you? She was quiet for so long he thought she might not answer. Then, yes, on my way out. I took $600 from his office safe, money he'd never miss but that I needed to disappear. Good, Gideon said. Hope it was more. He felt her smile against his chest. It was. I lied about the amount. Even better. She laughed quietly, and the sound did something strange to his heart, made it hurt and feel lighter at the same time. The storm hit around midnight, not just snow this time, but wind that screamed like something alive, shaking the cabin hard enough to make the beams creak. Gideon lay awake listening, tracking the storm's progress, planning what they'd do if the men came in weather like this. Evelyn stirred against him. You're not sleeping. Thinking. About them? About a lot of things. He was quiet for a moment. Evelyn, if something happens, if they get past me somehow, you run. There's a cave about half a mile north, hidden behind a deadfall. You can survive there for a few days if you have to. I'm not leaving you. You will if I tell you to. She pushed herself up on one elbow, looking down at him in the firelight. No, I won't. I've run enough. I'm done running. This isn't... I mean it, Gideon. Whatever comes, we face it together. That's the deal. He stared up at her, seeing the determination in her eyes, the strength that had pulled a dying man from a flooding river. She meant it. She'd actually stay and fight rather than run. You're going to get us both killed, he said. Maybe, but at least we'll go down swinging. Despite everything, he smiled. James would have liked you. Yeah? Yeah. He always did have terrible taste in people. She hit his chest lightly, but she was smiling too. Then, slowly, carefully, she leaned down and kissed him. It wasn't a long kiss. Wasn't desperate or passionate. Just her lips against his for a few heartbeats, soft and warm and real. When she pulled back, Gideon's heart was hammering like he'd run up the mountain. What was that for? His voice came out rougher than intended. Because I wanted to. Because tomorrow those men might find us and everything might go to hell. Because you're the first person in years who's made me feel safe. She settled back against his chest. Is that reason enough? Yeah, he managed. That's reason enough. They didn't talk after that. Just held each other while the storm raged and tried not to think about what morning might bring. But Gideon couldn't stop thinking about that kiss, about the weight of Evelyn in his arms, about how somewhere in the past few weeks, survival had become something else entirely. He told himself he didn't need this, didn't want connection or comfort or the risk of caring about someone who could be taken away. The mountain had taught him that lesson brutally. Except Evelyn wasn't asking permission. She'd just walked into his life, into his defenses, and set up camp in places he'd thought were dead. And the terrifying part was how much he wanted to let her stay. The storm blew itself out by morning, leaving 3 feet of fresh snow and a sky so blue it hurt to look at. Gideon woke to find Evelyn already up, coffee made, rifle cleaned, and loaded beside the door. They'll come today, she said. The tracks you found yesterday. They were close enough that this storm probably forced them to camp nearby. She was right. Gideon felt it in his bones, that particular tension before violence. He'd learned to trust that feeling in the war. Stay inside, he said. I'm going to scout the perimeter. I'm coming with you. Evelyn, Don't. We're past that. She grabbed the rifle. You watch your back, I'll watch mine. That's how this works now. He wanted to argue, but the look in her eyes stopped him. She wasn't the same woman who'd arrived a month ago, frightened, exhausted, unsure. The mountain had changed her, or maybe it had just revealed what was already there. They moved through the snow together, Gideon in front, Evelyn 6 feet behind and to the left. He'd taught her the basics of tactical movement, and she'd absorbed it like someone who understood that attention to detail meant survival. They found the camp about a mile east, 4 bedrolls under a makeshift shelter, fire burned down to coals. The men were gone, but they'd left fresh tracks heading west, toward the cabin. They're already moving, Gideon said quietly. We need to get back. They made it halfway before the first shot rang out. The bullet hit a tree 6 inches from Gideon's head, spraying bark and snow. He grabbed Evelyn and dragged her behind a boulder as 2 more shots echoed through the forest. Stay down! He brought his rifle up, scanning for targets. Movement through the trees. 2 men, maybe 3, using the forest for cover. Smart. They knew what they were doing. Gideon Hale, a voice called out, the well-dressed man from yesterday. We don't want trouble with you. Just send out the woman and we'll leave peaceful. Not happening, Gideon shouted back. She's a wanted fugitive. You're harboring a criminal. She's my wife, and you're trespassing on my land. A pause. Then, we can do this the hard way if you prefer. Another shot. This one closer, ricocheting off the boulder they hid behind. Gideon fired back, aiming for the muzzle flash. Someone yelped. A hit, but not fatal. There's 4 of them and 2 of us, Evelyn said, her voice surprisingly steady. We can't win a straight fight. We don't have to win, just have to make them quit. How? Gideon was already moving, pulling Evelyn deeper into the trees. We know this mountain. They don't. We use that. They ran through heavy snow, Gideon choosing a path that forced their pursuers to follow single file through difficult terrain. Behind them, he could hear the men crashing through the forest, cursing the snow and the cold. He led Evelyn to a narrow ravine he knew well, barely 15 feet wide, with steep sides that would funnel anyone following into a killing zone. They positioned themselves on opposite ridges. When they come through, Gideon said quietly, aim for center mass. Don't hesitate. Evelyn nodded, face pale, but determined. They didn't wait long. The first man came through the ravine at a run, saw them too late. Gideon fired. The man went down hard, screaming. The others pulled back immediately, taking cover. You shot him, one of them yelled. He's bleeding bad. Then maybe you should get him to a doctor instead of chasing people up mountains, Gideon called back. You don't know who you're dealing with. Crow will. I don't care about Crow. Tell him if he wants her, he can come get her himself. But it'll cost him more than money. Silence from below. Then the sound of men arguing in low voices. Finally, movement. They were retreating, dragging their wounded companion with them. Gideon waited 5 full minutes before climbing down. The blood in the snow was already freezing, but there was a lot of it. The wounded man might make it if they got him to Iron Creek quickly. Might not. Is he dead? Evelyn asked quietly. Don't know, don't care. Gideon met her eyes. You did good. I didn't shoot. You stayed calm, held position. That's just as important. They made their way back to the cabin carefully, checking for more ambushes. But the forest stayed quiet. The men were gone. For now. Inside, Gideon barred the door and checked their ammunition. They'd used 6 rounds, enough left for another fight if it came to that, but not enough for a prolonged siege. Evelyn sank into a chair, shaking now that the danger had passed. They'll come back, with more men next time. Maybe, but that storm bought us time. Roads will be impassable for at least a week, maybe 2, and I hit that man hard. They'll need to deal with him first. And then? Then we figure out what comes next. Gideon sat across from her. Evelyn, this isn't going away. Crow isn't going to give up. I know. So we have choices. We can try to run farther. There's territory farther north, places even harder to reach. Or we can go back to Iron Creek, face this head on, try to fight the legal battle. With what? His forged documents against my word? With the truth. With witnesses from the stagecoach crash. With people who've seen what kind of person you are up here. He paused. It's a long shot. But running forever isn't living. She looked at him for a long time. You'd do that? Stand with me against someone like Crow? Already shot one of his men. Bit late to back out now. Despite everything, she laughed. Then she was crying, tears running down her face, as all the fear and tension of the past weeks finally broke through. Gideon pulled her into his arms and held her while she shook apart. This was what survival cost. Eventually, you had to feel everything you'd been pushing down to keep moving. I'm sorry, she gasped against his chest. I'm so sorry I brought this to your door. Stop. You didn't bring anything I couldn't handle. You could have died today. Could have died any day up here. Mountain doesn't care about fair. He pulled back to look at her tear-stained face. But for what it's worth, I'm glad you're here. Even with the men with guns, even with all of it. Why? Because this cabin was just a place I came to wait for death. You made it feel like a home again. The words surprised him even as he said them, but they were true. So yeah, we'll figure this out. Together. She kissed him then, hard and desperate, and he kissed her back with 3 years of loneliness pouring out. They broke apart breathing hard, foreheads pressed together. We should eat something, Gideon said eventually. Get our strength back. Practical as always. Someone has to be. They prepared a meal together, movement synchronized from weeks of shared space. The cabin felt smaller somehow, or maybe they'd just grown larger in it, filling spaces that had been empty before. While they ate, Gideon laid out what he knew about Crow's operation, what they'd be facing if they went back to Iron Creek. It wasn't encouraging. Money bought a lot of loyalty, and Crow had plenty of both. But people up here don't trust outsiders, Gideon said. And they especially don't trust rich men from back east telling them how things should be. If we're smart about it, we might be able to turn that in our favor. How? By being honest. By not hiding. By making Crow prove his case in front of people who value straight talk over fancy documents. Evelyn considered this. It's a risk. Everything worth doing is. That night they didn't bother with separate blankets. They lay together by the fire, neither sleeping much, both thinking about what morning would bring. Gideon traced patterns on Evelyn's shoulder, memorizing the shape of her, the way she breathed, the small sounds she made when she was almost asleep. I never thought I'd find this again, he said quietly. Find what? Someone worth protecting. Someone who makes the world feel less empty. She turned in his arms to face him. Gideon Hale, are you telling me you care about me? Might be. Only might be. He kissed her instead of answering, and she melted into him like she'd been waiting for permission. When they finally pulled apart, both breathless, something had changed between them again, shifted from partnership to something deeper, more complicated, more real. We're in trouble, Evelyn whispered. Yeah. I mean, us, this. We're supposed to be a practical arrangement. I know. But it stopped being practical weeks ago, didn't it? Gideon thought about that kiss by the fire, about holding her through storms, about the way his chest had tightened when those bullets came close to her. Yeah, he admitted, it stopped being practical. So what do? We stop pretending it's something it's not. We stop lying to ourselves. He cupped her face gently. We call it what it is. And what is it? He looked into her eyes, saw his own loneliness reflected back, saw the careful hope she was trying not to show, saw a future that terrified him because it meant having something to lose again. It's everything, he said simply. It's everything I swore I didn't need, and it's going to scare the hell out of me, and I want it anyway. Evelyn smiled, trembling and real. Good, because I want it too. They held each other while the fire burned low and the stars wheeled overhead. Tomorrow they'd have to decide, run or fight, hide or stand. Tomorrow there'd be consequences and danger and all the complications of choosing something over survival. But tonight, for the first time in longer than either could remember, they weren't alone. And that made everything else worth facing. They had 4 days of peace before the mountain tried to kill Gideon. 4 days of planning, of reinforcing the cabin's defenses, of teaching Evelyn everything he knew about survival. 4 days of stolen moments between the work, her hand brushing his as they passed tools, lingering looks across the table, kisses that grew less careful and more desperate each time. 4 days where they let themselves believe they might actually have a chance. Then the weather turned. Gideon woke on the fifth morning to air so cold it burned his lungs. The kind of cold that froze spit before it hit the ground, that made the trees crack like rifle shots. Outside, the sky had that peculiar yellowish cast that meant a serious storm was building. "Don't go out today," Evelyn said, watching him prepare his pack. "Please, something feels wrong. Traps won't check themselves, and we need the meat. We have enough to last a week." "And if this storm lasts 2 weeks? 3? He kissed her forehead. "I'll be quick. There and back before the worst hits." She grabbed his arm. "Gideon, I mean it. Stay." He should have listened. Later, lying broken at the bottom of a ravine, he'd replay that moment over and over, her hand on his arm, the fear in her eyes, the choice he'd made to ignore both. But standing in the cabin that morning, he'd just squeezed her hand and promised to be careful. The trap line was brutal. 3 traps had caught nothing. 2 had been destroyed by something, probably a bear waking early from hibernation, hungry and mean. The 6th held a frozen fox, its pelt worthless now. Gideon was resetting the 7th trap when the snow beneath his feet shifted. Not much, just a whisper of movement. But up here, a whisper was all it took. He tried to step back. Too late. The cornice broke with a sound like tearing fabric, and suddenly there was nothing beneath him but air. He hit the slope hard, tumbling, trying to grab anything. His rifle went flying. His pack tore loose. The world became a confusion of snow and sky and the awful certainty that he was about to die. The impact, when it came, drove all the air from his lungs. Gideon lay at the bottom of the ravine, unable to breathe, unable to move, his mind screaming that he needed to get up but his body refusing to cooperate. Pain came in waves, his left leg, his ribs, his head where he'd hit something sharp on the way down. He managed to draw a breath. It felt like inhaling broken glass. Moving was worse. His left leg wouldn't support weight, broken probably, or close to it. His ribs screamed with every breath. When he touched his head, his glove came away red with blood. The storm was coming. He could see it building, feel the temperature dropping even further. If he stayed here, he'd be dead by nightfall. Gideon looked up at the slope he'd fallen down. 40 feet, maybe 50. Steep and covered in ice. No way to climb it, not with a broken leg. Not in his condition. He was going to die out here. The thought came with strange clarity, almost peaceful. He'd survived the war, survived 3 years alone on this mountain, survived everything that had tried to break him. But in the end, the mountain would win. It always did. Except Evelyn was waiting at the cabin. Evelyn, who'd made him promise to be careful. Evelyn, who'd begged him not to go. Evelyn, who would blame herself when he didn't come back. Gideon gritted his teeth and started crawling. Every movement was agony. His broken leg dragged uselessly behind him. His ribs grated with each breath. Blood from the head wound kept running into his eyes. But he crawled anyway, following the ravine downstream because that was the only direction he could manage. An hour passed. Maybe 2. Time stopped meaning anything. There was only the next pull forward, the next breath, the next moment of not giving up. The snow started falling around the 3rd hour. Big, heavy flakes that quickly built up and made everything harder. Gideon's hands had gone numb. He couldn't feel his feet anymore. The cold was inside him now, slowing his thoughts, making sleep seem like a reasonable option. "Just rest," part of him whispered. "Just for a minute." But he knew if he stopped, he wouldn't start again. So he kept crawling. The sun was setting when he heard her voice. "Gideon!" He thought he was hallucinating. Had to be. No way Evelyn would be out here, not in this storm, not in the dark. "Gideon, answer me." Closer now, real. He tried to shout back but could only manage a croak. Then she was there, materializing out of the snow like something conjured. She dropped to her knees beside him, her face white with fear and relief. "Oh, thank heaven. I thought—" She stopped, assessing his injuries with hands that shook. "Your leg, your head. How long have you been—" "Hours," he managed. "Fell. Can't walk." All right, we'll figure this out." But he could see the panic in her eyes. She was one person. He was twice her size and dead weight. The cabin was miles away, and the storm was getting worse. This was impossible. "Leave me," he said. "Get back before—" "Shut up." She was already pulling off her pack, digging through it. "I'm not leaving you out here. Don't insult me by suggesting it again. She found rope, tied it around his chest in a makeshift harness. Then she positioned herself in front of him, looped the rope over her shoulder, and started pulling. Gideon screamed. Couldn't help it. Every bump and scrape sent fresh agony through his broken body. But Evelyn didn't stop. She just kept pulling, step by agonizing step, dragging him through the snow like a stubborn mule pulling a plow. "I'm sorry," she gasped. "I'm so sorry. Just hold on." They made it 10 feet before she had to stop, breathing hard. 20 feet before she nearly collapsed. But each time she got up and started pulling again. The storm worsened. Visibility dropped to almost nothing. Gideon couldn't see anything but Evelyn's silhouette ahead of him, hear anything but her ragged breathing and his own moans of pain. She fell twice, got back up both times. An hour passed. 2. Gideon drifted in and out of consciousness, the cold and pain pulling him under. Every time he surfaced, Evelyn was still pulling, still fighting, refusing to stop. "Talk to me," she demanded at one point. "Stay awake. Tell me about James." "What?" "Your brother. Tell me about him. What was he like?" Gideon's thoughts were slow, sluggish. He laughed a lot. Used to drive me crazy. Everything was funny to him." "What else?" "He was terrible at cards, lost every game. But he kept playing anyway, said it wasn't about winning." "He sounds like he was good." "He was. Better than me." "I doubt that." Another few feet. Her breathing was labored now, desperate. "Keep talking." "What did he want to do after the war?" "Wanted to be a teacher. History. Said someone had to make sure people remembered things right." "He would have been good at that." "Yeah." Gideon's vision was blurring. "Evelyn, you need to stop. You're going to be—" "I see it. The cabin. We're almost there." He tried to focus, but everything was white and dark at the same time. Then hands were on him, pulling him up steps, and the blessed warmth of the fire hit his frozen skin. Evelyn was crying and working at the same time, cutting away his frozen clothes, wrapping him in blankets, building up the fire until the cabin was stifling hot. "Your leg," she said. "I have to set it. This is going to hurt." It did. He passed out somewhere in the middle of it. When he woke, he was in the bed, buried under every blanket they owned. Evelyn sat beside him, her face drawn and exhausted, hands wrapped in fresh bandages. The same hands she'd shredded, pulling him through miles of snow. "Hey," she said softly. "Hey." His voice was barely a whisper. "You're insane." "Probably." She touched his face gently. "How do you feel?" "Like I fell off a mountain." "Technically, you fell down a ravine." "Important distinction." She laughed, but it came out half sob. "I thought I'd lost you. When you didn't come back, when the storm started, I thought—" "I know." He caught her hand with his, carefully because everything still hurt. "But you didn't. You saved me." "You would have done the same." "I don't know if I could have, physically. You dragged me 3 miles. 3.2, actually. I counted." Despite everything, he smiled. "Show off." She leaned down and kissed him carefully, mindful of his injuries. When she pulled back, tears were running down her face. "Don't you ever scare me like that again." "I'll try not to." "I'm serious, Gideon. I can't—" Her voice broke. "I can't lose you. Not now. Not after I just found you." He pulled her down to lie beside him, ignoring the pain it caused. "You're not going to lose me. I'm too stubborn to die. Promise me." "I promise I'll do everything I can to stay alive. That's the best I've got." She settled against him carefully, her hand resting over his heart like she needed to feel it beating. They stayed like that while the storm raged outside. Gideon drifted in and out of consciousness, fever building from the injuries. Each time he surfaced, Evelyn was there, changing the bandages on his head wound, checking his leg, forcing water down his throat. On the second day, the fever peaked. Gideon thrashed in the bed, caught in nightmares that mixed the war with the present, seeing James and Evelyn and Crow's men all bleeding in the snow. He woke screaming more than once. Each time, Evelyn held him until the terror passed, whispering that he was safe, that she had him, that he wasn't alone. By the third day, the fever broke. Gideon woke clear-headed for the first time, weak as a newborn, but aware. Evelyn was asleep in the chair beside the bed, her head on her arms, exhausted beyond measure. He watched her sleep and felt something crack open in his chest. This woman had dragged him through a blizzard when the smart move would have been to save herself, had fought off fever dreams and kept him alive through sheer stubborn will, had refused to leave him even when every rational argument said she should. She'd saved his life. Not because she had to, because she'd chosen to, because she loved him. The realization hit like a physical blow. Somewhere between survival and now, this had become love. Real, terrifying, all-consuming love. And he loved her back. Had been falling for weeks without recognizing it. Every moment of watching her adapt to the mountain, every evening of her reading by firelight, every time she'd looked at his scars and seen the man beneath them instead of the damage. He was completely, irrevocably in love with Evelyn Mercer, and that changed everything. She stirred, opened her eyes, saw him watching. "You're awake. Really awake this time." "Yeah. How do you feel?" "Like I got run over by a train, but better than yesterday." She pressed her hand to his forehead, checking for fever. "Temperature's down. That's good." "Evelyn, your leg is healing, I think. The swelling's—" "Evelyn." He caught her hand. "Look at me." She did, and he saw his own fear reflected back. The terror of carrying this much, of having something precious that could be taken away. "Thank you," he said quietly, "for not giving up, for bringing me back. Where else would I go? I mean it. You could have run, could have let the mountain take me and gotten clear of all this." "Don't." Her voice was sharp. "Don't act like I'd ever consider that. You're not something I'm tolerating until I can escape. You're—" She stopped, struggling with words. "You're everything to me. Don't you understand that?" "I'm starting to." "Good. Because when you're healed, we're going down to Iron Creek. Together. And we're ending this thing with Crow once and for all." "That's not—" "It is. I'm done hiding. I'm done letting him control my life from 1,000 miles away. We're going to face this head on, and either we win or we go down fighting, but we're doing it on our terms." Gideon studied her face, the determination there, the strength that had brought him home. "You're sure?" "I've never been more sure of anything." "All right then. When I can walk again, we'll go." "When you can walk again," she agreed. She leaned down and kissed him, and this time it wasn't careful or gentle. It was fierce and claiming and full of everything they'd been too afraid to say out loud. When they broke apart, both breathing hard, Gideon pulled her onto the bed beside him despite the screaming protest from his ribs. "You should rest," she said, but she didn't pull away. "I've been resting for 3 days. Right now I just want to hold you." They lay together while afternoon light filtered through the shutters. Outside, the storm had finally passed, leaving the world buried under fresh snow. Inside, two people who'd started as strangers held each other and tried to memorize the moment before everything changed again. "Tell me the plan," Gideon said. "What happens when we get to Iron Creek?" "We find Judge Hartwell. We tell him everything, who Crow is, what he did, why I ran. We get ahead of whatever story Crow's people are spreading. And if the judge doesn't believe us, then we make him believe us. We bring witnesses. Mrs. Brennan saw the condition I was in after the stagecoach crash. The driver, Patterson, knows I saved his life. People in town have seen how we are together. That has to count for something. Money counts for more. Maybe. But we're not without resources. You've lived here 3 years. People know you. They might not like you much, but they respect you. That matters." Gideon wanted to believe her, wanted to think that truth and testimony would be enough. But he'd seen what money could do, how it twisted things, bought loyalties, manufactured evidence. Still, what choice did they have? Running hadn't worked. Hiding hadn't worked. The only option left was to fight. "All right," he said, "we do it your way. But we're smart about it. We document everything. We get our story straight. We don't give Crow any openings." "Agreed. And if things go bad, if it looks like they're going to take you, you run. You head north to the Blackwood settlement. There's a trapper there named Carson who owes me. He'll hide you." I'm serious, Evelyn. Promise me. If it comes apart, you save yourself." She was quiet for a long time. Finally, "Only if you promise the same. If they come for you because of what happened with those men in the forest, you don't play hero. You get clear. Deal." They shook on it solemnly, both knowing they were lying, both knowing that when it came down to it, they'd sacrifice themselves for the other without hesitation. Some promises were meant to be broken. The next week was hard. Gideon's leg healed slowly. An infection threatened twice before Evelyn managed to fight it off with what limited medical supplies they had. She fed him, changed his bandages, helped him with the humiliating necessities of being bedridden. He hated every minute of the helplessness. Hated being unable to protect her, unable to even walk to the door. But Evelyn handled everything, chopping wood, hauling water, checking the trapline, keeping them fed. She was stronger than he'd given her credit for, stronger than she'd probably given herself credit for. "You're staring again?" she said one afternoon, catching him watching her work. "Just thinking." "About?" "About how you're probably the toughest person I've ever met." She snorted. "You saw me cry for an hour straight yesterday when I thought the infection was getting worse. And then you cut the wound open and drained it yourself without flinching. Tough doesn't mean not feeling things. It means doing what needs doing anyway." Evelyn came to sit beside the bed. "You want to know the truth? I'm terrified, all the time. I'm terrified that your leg won't heal right, that the infection will come back, that Crow's men will return before you can walk, that we'll get to Iron Creek and lose everything anyway. But you keep going, because the alternative is giving up, and I'm done giving up." Gideon reached for her hand. "We're going to be all right. Whatever happens in Iron Creek, we'll handle it." "You can't promise that." "No, but I can promise I'll be standing beside you when we face it." She leaned down and kissed him, soft and slow. These moments had become their anchor, brief pockets of peace before the storm they both knew was coming. By the end of the second week, Gideon could stand with support. By the third, he could walk using a crutch Evelyn had fashioned from a tree branch. The leg wasn't fully healed, wouldn't be for months probably, but it was good enough to travel. They made their preparations carefully. Gideon cleaned and loaded both rifles, packed ammunition, made sure their supplies were secure. Evelyn gathered what documentation they had, the marriage certificate, letters from the mail order agency, anything that proved their story. The night before they planned to leave, neither could sleep. They lay together in the dark, holding each other, both thinking about what tomorrow might bring. "Gideon?" Evelyn's voice was small in the darkness. "Yeah? If this goes wrong, they separate us or take me, or they won't. But if they do, I need you to know that these past months have been the happiest of my life. Broken leg and gunfights and all of it. I've never felt safer with anyone, never felt more myself." Gideon pulled her closer, feeling the weight of her words settle into his chest. "Same. I came up here to die and you made me want to live again. Whatever happens tomorrow, that matters. You matter." "I love you," she whispered. "I should have said it before, but I was scared. I'm still scared. But I love you, Gideon Hale." His throat tightened. He'd thought those words were lost to him forever, buried with James and everyone else he'd failed to protect. But here they were, waiting to be spoken. "I love you too. More than I thought I could love anything again." They made love then, slow and careful and tender, both trying to memorize every touch in case it was the last. Afterward, they held each other until gray dawn light crept through the shutters. Time to face what was coming. They dressed in their best clothes, what passed for best up here anyway. Gideon's leg ached but held his weight. Evelyn had pulled her hair back severely, looking every inch the respectable woman she'd been before Crow destroyed her reputation. At the cabin door, they paused. "Last chance to change your mind," Gideon said. "We could disappear into Canada, start over somewhere nobody knows us. And spend the rest of our lives looking over our shoulders? No, we end this today." He nodded. "Then let's go end it." They mounted up and started the long ride down to Iron Creek. The trail was treacherous with snow, and Gideon's injured leg made riding painful, but they pushed through. Behind them, the cabin sat silent and empty, waiting to see if they'd return. As they descended, Evelyn reached over and took Gideon's hand. They rode like that, fingers linked, facing whatever waited below together. Iron Creek appeared around noon, the same rough collection of buildings, the same hard people scraping by in the shadow of the mountains. But this time everything felt different. This time they weren't running. This time they were choosing to stand and fight. They tied their horses outside Judge Hartwell's office and walked in together, Gideon leaning heavily on his crutch, Evelyn's hand firm in his. Hartwell looked up from his desk, his expression unreadable. "Mr. and Mrs. Hale, I was wondering when you'd show up." We need to talk, Gideon said, about Victor Crow and the lies he's been spreading. I assumed as much. Hartwell gestured to the chairs. Sit. You're going to want to be sitting for this. They exchanged a glance, worry flashing between them. Why? Evelyn asked. Because Crow's men got to town 3 days ago, and they brought a federal marshal with them. The words hung in the air like a death sentence. Evelyn's hand tightened on Gideon's until her knuckles went white. A federal marshal, Gideon repeated slowly. Crow brought federal law into this. He did. Hartwell leaned back in his chair, studying them both. Marshal names Clayton Wade. Came in with documents, warrants, the whole arsenal. Says Mrs. Hale here is wanted for theft, fraud, and assault back in Missouri. It's all lies, Evelyn said, her voice steady despite the fear in her eyes. Crow manufactured every bit of it. I'm sure he did. Question is, can you prove it? Gideon shifted his weight, his injured leg throbbing. What's Wade like, honest man or one who can be bought? That's the thing. Hartwell pulled a bottle from his desk drawer, poured himself a drink without offering them any. Wade's got a reputation for being straight. 20 years as a marshal, never been accused of taking bribes, follows the letter of the law, which means if the paperwork's in order, he'll execute those warrants regardless of what actually happened. So we're finished before we start, Evelyn said quietly. I didn't say that. Hartwell took a long drink. Wade may be by the book, but he's not stupid, and he doesn't like being used. If you can convince him Crow's playing him, he might listen. Might, Gideon said. That's not much to bet on. It's what you've got. Hartwell set down his glass. There's something else you should know. Crow himself arrived yesterday. He's staying at the hotel, been holding court in the saloon, buying drinks, making friends, telling anyone who'll listen about the poor governess who stole from him and broke his nose when he confronted her. Evelyn's face had gone pale. He's here, in Iron Creek. Apparently he wants to see this through personally. Make sure justice is served. Hartwell's tone made it clear what he thought of Crow's version of justice. Word is he's pushing for a formal hearing tomorrow. Public affair, let the whole town see how the law handles thieves and liars. He wants to humiliate me, Evelyn said. Break me in front of everyone. Probably. A man like that, it's not enough to win. He needs everyone to see you lose. Gideon stood, the movement painful but necessary. Then we give him his hearing, but we make damn sure he doesn't get the ending he wants. You got a plan? Hartwell asked. Working on it. Who else knows we're here? Just me so far. But Iron Creek's a small town. Someone saw you ride in, and by now half the population knows. Good. Let them talk. Gideon turned to Evelyn. We're not hiding. We walk out of here together, heads up, and we go straight to the church. She looked at him, confused. The church? We got married in this office because it was practical and quick. But if we're going to fight for this, for us, then I want to do it right. Proper vows, witnesses, the whole thing. Let everyone in town see that you're my wife and I'm standing with you no matter what Crow throws at us. Evelyn's eyes filled with tears, but she blinked them back. You want to get married again? Now? With a federal marshal hunting me and Crow waiting to destroy us? Especially now, because after tomorrow, we might not get another chance. Hartwell coughed. The Reverend's at the church most afternoons. He'd probably do it if you asked. Then that's where we're going. Gideon offered Evelyn his hand. What do you say? Want to marry me again? She took his hand, a smile breaking through despite everything. Yes, I really do. They walked out of Hartwell's office into Iron Creek's main street, and Gideon felt every eye turn toward them. Conversation stopped. People stared openly. He'd expected it, but it still set his teeth on edge. Let them look, Evelyn murmured. We've got nothing to hide. The church was a simple wooden structure at the north end of town, its cross pointing at the gray winter sky. They found Reverend Thomas inside, organizing hymnals with the careful precision of a man who'd run out of important work years ago. He looked up when they entered, recognition dawning slowly. Mr. Hale, and this must be your wife. It is. We need a favor, Reverend. Thomas set down his hymnals. I heard there's been some trouble. Men asking questions, showing papers. There has, which is why we're here. Gideon kept his voice level. We were married by Judge Hartwell a few months back. Legal and binding, but we want to do it again here, with proper vows and witnesses. Today, if you're willing. The Reverend's eyebrows rose. Today? That's rather sudden. There's a hearing tomorrow, federal marshals involved. Things could go badly. Gideon met his eyes directly. If they do, I want to make sure everyone knows she's mine and I chose this. Not survival, not convenience. Choice. Thomas studied them both for a long moment. You understand what you're asking? A church wedding is a sacred covenant. It's not something to be done lightly or for show. It's not for show, Evelyn said quietly. I love him, Reverend, and whatever happens tomorrow, I want to stand before this community and say so. Something in her voice must have convinced him, because Thomas nodded slowly. All right, give me an hour to prepare and spread the word. A wedding should have witnesses. Thank you, Gideon said. They left the church and walked toward the boarding house, needing somewhere to wait, somewhere to prepare. Mrs. Brennan met them at the door, her sharp eyes taking in everything. Gideon's crutch, Evelyn's nervous hands, the weight they both carried. Heard you were back. Heard about the trouble, too. We're handling it, Gideon said. Are you now? She stepped aside to let them in. Room's available if you need it, same one as before. Upstairs, in the small room where this had all started months ago, they stood by the window looking out at Iron Creek, the town that might destroy them or save them, depending on how the next 24 hours played out. Are you sure about this? Evelyn asked. The wedding, I mean. It won't change what happens tomorrow. No, but it'll change how we face it. Gideon turned to her side. First time we did this, it was a transaction, two people desperate enough to bargain with strangers. But that's not what this is anymore. What is it? He pulled her close, careful of his injured leg. It's me telling you and everyone else that I choose you. Every single day, I choose you. And nothing Crow or Wade or anyone else says is going to change that. She kissed him then, hard and fierce, pouring months of fear and hope and love into it. When they broke apart, both were breathing hard. I should find something decent to wear, Evelyn said. Can't get married in trail clothes twice. Mrs. Brennan might have something. She seems to have opinions about everything else. Evelyn laughed despite the tension. I'll ask. She left, and Gideon sat heavily on the bed, his legs screaming after the morning's riding and walking. He closed his eyes and tried to organize his thoughts for tomorrow. They needed witnesses. They needed Patterson, the stage driver Evelyn had saved. They needed anyone who could testify to her character, her actions, anything that contradicted Crow's narrative. A knock on the door interrupted his planning. Come in. Mrs. Brennan entered, carrying a bundle of dark blue fabric. Your wife said she needed a dress. This was my daughter's. She died of influenza 3 years back, but I kept her things. Figured someone might need them eventually. Gideon stood. That's generous of you. Don't mistake it for sentiment. I just don't like seeing innocent women railroaded by rich men who think they own the world. She set the dress on the bed. That girl of yours, she really steal from Crow? Yes. Mrs. Brennan's expression didn't change. Good. Hope she took plenty. She did. Even better. The older woman studied him. You love her? Yes, ma'am. Then fight for her tomorrow. Don't let them take her without making them work for it. I don't plan to. She left, and Gideon returned to his planning. But his thoughts kept drifting to Evelyn, to the way she'd looked pulling him through that storm, to the fierce determination in her eyes when she'd said she was done running. He'd fight for her. He'd fight until he had nothing left, because she'd done the same for him. An hour later, they walked back to the church together. Evelyn wore the blue dress, her hair arranged simply but carefully. She looked beautiful and terrified and determined all at once. The church was fuller than Gideon had expected. Maybe 30 people scattered among the pews, Mrs. Brennan in front, a few miners Gideon recognized from the general store, some families from the outlying claims. Even Judge Hartwell had shown up, standing in the back with his arms crossed. And there, in the last pew, a man Gideon didn't know, well-dressed, cold-eyed, watching everything with the careful attention of a predator. Victor Crow had come to watch them marry. Evelyn saw him too. Her step faltered, but Gideon squeezed her hand and kept walking. They wouldn't give Crow the satisfaction of fear. Reverend Thomas stood at the altar, his Bible open, his expression solemn. Dearly beloved, we are gathered here in the sight of heaven to join this man and this woman in holy matrimony. The ceremony was simple and traditional. Thomas spoke about commitment and sacrifice, about choosing to stand together against whatever the world brought. His words felt aimed directly at their situation, and maybe they were. When it came time for the vows, Gideon turned to face Evelyn fully, taking both her hands in his. I, Gideon Hale, take you, Evelyn Mercer, to be my lawfully wedded wife. I promise to stand with you through whatever comes, to protect you when I can and support you when I can't. I promise to choose you every day for as long as we both live. His voice carried through the small church, steady and clear. Let Crow hear it. Let everyone hear it. Evelyn's voice shook at first but grew stronger. I, Evelyn Mercer, take you, Gideon Hale, to be my lawfully wedded husband. I promise to stand with you through storm and danger, to fight beside you when needed and heal you when I can. I promise to choose you every day, no matter what the world says or does. Thomas smiled. By the power vested in me, I now pronounce you husband and wife. Again, may the blessing of the Almighty be upon you both. Gideon kissed her, and the church erupted in scattered applause. Not everyone. Some just watched silently, but enough to matter. As they walked back down the aisle, Gideon looked directly at Crow. The man's face was a mask of controlled fury, his hands clenched on the pew in front of him. Good. Let him be angry. Let him see that money couldn't buy everything. Outside, people offered quiet congratulations. Mrs. Brennan hugged Evelyn fiercely. Judge Hartwell shook Gideon's hand and murmured, "That took guts. Hope it helps tomorrow." They were heading back to the boarding house when a voice stopped them. "Mrs. Hale, a moment, please." Victor Crow stood on the church steps, perfectly composed now, his earlier anger buried beneath practiced civility. He was younger than Gideon had expected, maybe 45, and handsome in the way that money and privilege often produced, but his eyes were flat and cold. "Mr. Crow," Evelyn said, her voice surprisingly steady, "I have nothing to say to you. That's unfortunate, because I have a great deal to say to you." He descended the steps slowly, deliberately. "You've caused me considerable trouble, Evelyn. Considerable expense. I've had to travel to this wretched frontier, spend weeks tracking you down, all because you couldn't accept your place." "My place?" Evelyn's voice went sharp. "You mean as your property?" "I mean as someone who understood the natural order of things. I gave you employment, security, a position in my household, and you repaid me with theft and violence. You tried to force yourself on me. I defended myself. That's not how the law will see it." Crow's smile was ice. "The law will see forged documents, signed confessions from witnesses, evidence of your criminal nature. The law will see a young woman of questionable character who seduced a desperate mountain man and is now trying to hide behind a sham marriage." Gideon stepped forward, putting himself between Crow and Evelyn. "The marriage is legal, witnessed and registered. Yes, I saw. Very touching ceremony, quite the performance." Crow's eyes flicked to Gideon dismissively. "Tell me, Mr. Hale, what did she promise you? Money, companionship, or did she simply take advantage of your isolation?" "She promised me honesty, which is more than you've given anyone." "Honesty?" Crow laughed. "Is it honest to steal $600? To assault an employer? To flee across state lines to avoid justice?" "It's honest to protect yourself from a predator." Crow's expression hardened. "Careful, Mr. Hale. You're already in enough trouble. One of my men is recovering from a gunshot wound he received on your property. Self-defense has limits. So does trespassing." They stared at each other, the tension thick enough to cut. Finally, Crow stepped back. "Enjoy your evening, Mr. and Mrs. Hale. Tomorrow, the law will settle this matter properly. And when it does, Evelyn, you'll learn what happens to people who defy me." He walked away, leaving them standing in the cold street. "He's going to destroy us," Evelyn whispered. "He's going to try." Gideon took her hand. "Come on, we've got work to do." They spent the evening gathering what defense they could. Gideon found Patterson, the stage driver, in a boarding house on the east side of town. The man's leg was still healing, but he agreed immediately to testify about the bridge collapse and Evelyn's rescue. "That woman saved my life," Patterson said firmly. "Pulled me from that wreckage when everyone else ran. Kept me warm and conscious through the worst night of my life. Whatever that fancy man says about her, I know what kind of person she really is." They found 2 miners who'd seen Evelyn helping at the general store, doing small kindnesses without being asked. Found a woman whose child Evelyn had helped when the boy had gotten lost near the claims. Small testimonies. Small moments of decency. Against Crow's money and documents and manufactured evidence, it didn't feel like enough. That night, lying together in the boarding house room, neither could sleep. "What if we lose tomorrow?" Evelyn asked quietly. "Then we figure out what comes next." "There might not be a next. Wade could arrest me right there in the hearing. Then I'll get you out." "Gideon, you can barely walk. You can't—" "I'll find a way." He turned to face her in the darkness. "I didn't pull you back from that ravine just to lose you to Crow's lies. Whatever happens tomorrow, we face it together." She was crying silently, tears running down her face. "I'm so scared." "I know, me too." "What scares you?" "Losing you, failing to protect you, having to watch them take you away and not being able to stop it." His voice broke. "I've lost everyone I cared about. My brother. The men under my command. I can't lose you too." She kissed him desperately, and they held each other like drowning people clinging to driftwood. They made love slowly, tenderly, both trying to memorize every touch in case it was the last. Afterward, as gray dawn light began to creep through the window, Evelyn spoke quietly. "If they take me, I need you to promise something." "No." "Listen, if they take me, you don't come after me. You don't throw your life away trying to break me out of prison or chase Crow back to St. Louis. You stay here. You live. You find someone else eventually, and you're happy. Promise me." "I can't promise that." "Gideon, no. You don't get to ask me to just move on like you were nothing, like these months meant nothing." He pulled her closer. "You're the first thing that's made sense to me since the war ended. The first person who saw past the damage and the scars and made me believe I deserved something good. So no, I won't promise to forget you. I won't promise to move on. I'll promise to fight until there's nothing left to fight with." She sobbed against his chest, and he held her while the sun rose on what might be their last day together. The hearing was set for 10 o'clock in the town hall. By 9:30, the building was packed. Every available seat taken, people standing along the walls, more crowding outside the windows. Iron Creek loved a spectacle, and this promised to be the biggest one they'd seen in years. Gideon and Evelyn sat at a rough table on one side of the room. Across from them, Victor Crow sat with his lawyers, two sharp-eyed men from Denver who looked like they'd come to devour someone and weren't picky about who. At the front, Judge Hartwell presided, with Federal Marshal Clayton Wade standing to his right. Wade was a tall man, weathered and hard, with gray in his beard and eyes that missed nothing. Hartwell called the room to order. "This is a preliminary hearing to determine if charges against Mrs. Evelyn Hale have sufficient merit to proceed to trial. Mr. Crow, you may present your case." The first lawyer stood, spreading papers on the table. "Your Honor, the facts are simple. Mrs. Hale, while employed as a governess in Mr. Crow's household, stole $600 in cash along with various jewelry items. When Mr. Crow confronted her about the theft, she assaulted him, breaking his nose, and fled. We have signed confessions from 3 household staff members who witnessed the theft and assault." He began reading the statements. Each one painted Evelyn as untrustworthy, violent, manipulative. Each one was detailed and damning. Evelyn sat rigid beside Gideon, her face white but composed. When the lawyer finished, Hartwell turned to them. "Mrs. Hale, how do you respond?" Evelyn stood slowly. "The statements are lies, Your Honor. Bought and paid for by a man who tried to force himself on me and couldn't accept rejection." A murmur ran through the crowd. Crow's face darkened, but he said nothing. "That's a serious accusation," Hartwell said. "Can you prove it?" "I can tell you what happened. The night I left, Mr. Crow came to my room uninvited. He made advances. When I refused, he became violent. I defended myself with whatever I could reach, which happened to be a candlestick. I did break his nose. And yes, I took money from his safe on my way out. Money I felt I'd earned dealing with his harassment for 6 months." "So you admit to theft and assault?" "I admit to defending myself and taking what I was owed. If that's theft in the eyes of the law, then I'm guilty. But I won't apologize for protecting myself from a predator." The room erupted. People talking over each other, shouting questions, arguing. Hartwell hammered for order. Crow's lawyer jumped up. "Your Honor, you see the kind of person we're dealing with? Violent, unrepentant, willing to slander a respected businessman to avoid responsibility." "I'm not slandering anyone," Evelyn cut in. I'm telling the truth. And if Mr. Crow wants to deny it, let him stand up and swear under oath that he never touched me, never made advances, never came to my room that night. All eyes turned to Crow. He sat perfectly still, his expression unreadable. Mr. Crow? Hartwell prompted. I don't have to defend myself against the baseless accusations of a thief, Crow said smoothly. The evidence speaks for itself. The evidence is forged, Evelyn said. Those confessions were bought. Those people will say whatever you paid them to say. Prove it, Crow's lawyer shot back. I can't, because I'm one woman with no money standing against a man who owns half of St. Louis. But that doesn't make him right. It just makes him powerful. Marshal Wade finally spoke, his voice cutting through the chaos. Judge Hartwell, if I may, I've reviewed the documents Mr. Crow provided. They appear legitimate, but I've also made inquiries of my own. He pulled out a notebook. I sent telegrams to St. Louis before the hearing, asked about Mr. Crow's reputation, his business dealings, his character. And? Hartwell leaned forward. And the responses were interesting. 3 different sources mentioned that Mr. Crow has a history of trouble with female employees. Nothing proven, nothing prosecuted, but enough smoke to suggest fire. Crow stood abruptly. This is outrageous. You're taking the word of unnamed gossips over sworn statements? I'm doing my job, Mr. Crow, which is to find the truth, not to rubber stamp whatever narrative you've constructed. Wade turned to Evelyn. Ma'am, you say you saved a stage driver after a bridge collapse? I did. Mr. Patterson, you're in the room. Come forward. Patterson hobbled to the front on his crutch, his leg still healing. Marshal, tell us what happened the night that bridge went down. Patterson did. Described the collapse, the panic, the freezing water. Described how Evelyn had pulled him from the wreckage and kept him alive through the night while everyone else looked after themselves. That woman's a hero, Patterson finished. I don't care what papers you got. I know what kind of person she is because she saved my life when she could have saved herself. More witnesses came forward then. Mrs. Brennan testified about Evelyn's condition when she arrived. Exhausted, injured, frightened, but determined. The miners spoke about her kindness. The mother whose child had gotten lost spoke about Evelyn's gentle care. Small testimonies, but they added up. When it was Gideon's turn, he stood despite the pain in his leg. I'm not going to tell you she's perfect. She's not. She stole money and ran across state lines and married a stranger to disappear. He met Wade's eyes directly. But I'm also not going to tell you she's a criminal. She's a woman who defended herself from assault and then had to run because the man who attacked her had enough money to make himself the victim. I've spent months with her. I've seen her strength, her courage, her capacity for sacrifice. And I'll tell you right now, if you try to take her, you'll have to go through me. The room went silent. Then a voice from the back spoke up. Same here. Everyone turned. An old prospector stood, grizzled and tough. Don't know these folks well, but I know I don't like seeing rich men from back east come out here and throw their weight around. This is our territory. We handle our own justice. Agreed, someone else called. She stays here, another voice added. More people spoke up, one by one, until half the room was standing with them. Crow's face had gone red. This is a mockery. You can't just ignore the law because you don't like where I'm from. Nobody's ignoring the law, Wade said quietly. But the law requires evidence, Mr. Crow. And right now, all I see is your word against hers, with a whole town's worth of character witnesses on her side. You have my statements, my documents, which may or may not be legitimate. I'll need to investigate further before I can act on them. Wade turned to Hartwell. Judge, I'm recommending we postpone this matter pending additional inquiry. Crow erupted. This is outrageous. I'll have your badge. He lunged toward Evelyn, and Gideon moved without thinking, putting himself between them despite his injured leg. They collided, and Gideon's leg buckled, sending both men crashing to the floor. A gunshot exploded through the hall. People screamed. Chaos erupted. When Gideon looked up, Wade had his pistol drawn, smoke rising from the barrel. The bullet had gone into the ceiling, a warning shot. Everyone calm down, Wade's voice cut through the panic. Mr. Crow, you're done here. Get out before I arrest you for assault. Crow climbed to his feet, his carefully constructed civility shattered. This isn't over. I'll come back with proper federal authority. I'll have this whole town investigated. You'll leave. Now. Wade's hand rested on his pistol. For a long moment, Crow stared at Evelyn with pure hatred. Then he turned and stalked out, his lawyers scrambling after him. The room stayed silent until they heard horses departing. Then everyone seemed to breathe at once. Hartwell banged his gavel. This hearing is postponed indefinitely pending Marshal Wade's investigation. Mrs. Hale, you're free to go, but stay in the territory until this is resolved. Yes, Your Honor, Evelyn managed. People crowded around them, offering congratulations, support, questions. Gideon barely heard any of it. His leg was screaming, and his head was spinning, and Evelyn was shaking beside him. Come on, he murmured. Let's get out of here. They made it outside before Evelyn's legs gave out. Gideon caught her, and they clung to each other in the cold street while Iron Creek buzzed around them. Is it over? She whispered. Is he really gone? For now, but Wade was right. He'll be back. With more lawyers, more documents, more pressure. So we're still not safe. No, but we bought time. And we showed this whole town that we're not going to be pushed around quietly. She laughed weakly. You tackled him. You can barely walk, and you tackled him. He was going for you. Wasn't thinking past that. My hero. She kissed him softly. My ridiculous, stubborn hero. They walked slowly back to the boarding house, Gideon leaning heavily on both his crutch and Evelyn. In their room, they collapsed onto the bed, exhausted beyond words. What do we do now? Evelyn asked. We go home, back to the cabin. We wait for Wade's investigation, and we hope it goes our way. And if it doesn't? Gideon pulled her close. Then we figure out what comes next, together. Like we always do. She settled against his chest, and for the first time in days, he felt her relax. The immediate crisis had passed. They'd survived another day. It wasn't victory, not yet, but it was enough. Outside, Iron Creek returned to its normal rhythm, and somewhere out there, Victor Crow was planning his next move. But for now, in this moment, Gideon and Evelyn had each other and the promise of tomorrow. That was worth fighting for. They stayed in Iron Creek for 3 more days, waiting for Marshal Wade's investigation to progress, waiting for some sign that their lives could move forward. The town treated them differently now, not quite as heroes, but not as pariahs either. People nodded when they passed on the street. The general store owner extended them credit without being asked, small gestures that meant more than grand speeches. On the 4th morning, Wade knocked on their boarding house door carrying a telegram and an expression that gave nothing away. News from St. Louis, he said without preamble. You'll want to sit down. They sat. Gideon's leg had healed enough that he could manage without the crutch most days, but he still moved carefully. Evelyn's hand found his automatically. Wade pulled out a chair. I sent inquiries to everyone I could think of. Police contacts, other marshals, court clerks. Asked about Victor Crow, his business practices, his reputation. The responses were enlightening. And? Gideon prompted when Wade paused. And it turns out Mr. Crow has left quite a trail behind him. 3 former governesses with similar stories to yours, Mrs. Hale. One filed charges that mysteriously disappeared. Another left town suddenly, and no one knows where she went. The 3rd is still in St. Louis, working in a factory, and too afraid to speak publicly. Evelyn's grip on Gideon's hand tightened. So I wasn't the first. No, ma'am. You were just the first one who fought back hard enough to leave evidence. That broken nose? Crow had to explain it to his doctors, his business partners, his wife. Created questions he couldn't fully control. His wife, Evelyn repeated quietly. He has a wife. He does. And based on what I'm hearing, she's not entirely ignorant of his behavior, just trapped by social position and lack of options. Wade leaned forward. Here's what matters legally. The documents Crow presented, the confessions, the theft reports. I had a handwriting expert examine them. At least 2 are forgeries. The signatures don't match the supposed witnesses. Whoever Crow paid to create his evidence wasn't quite good enough. Relief flooded through Gideon so intensely he felt dizzy. So the charges don't hold. The charges are garbage, but there's a complication. Wade's expression hardened. Crow's not just wealthy. He's connected. Has friends in the territorial government, judges on his payroll, politicians who owe him favors. Even with the evidence falling apart, he could still make trouble. Could tie this up in courts for years. Make your lives hell through legal fees and depositions and harassment. So we're not free, Evelyn said. Not yet, but I have a proposal. Wade pulled out another document. I've written up a full report of my findings. Evidence of forgery, testimony about Crow's pattern of behavior, everything. I'm recommending all charges be dropped and that Crow be investigated for attempted fraud and abuse of federal process. He'll fight that, Gideon said. Oh, he'll fight it hard. But here's the thing. Crow's power comes from his reputation. He's built an empire on being seen as respectable, trustworthy, above reproach. If this report becomes public, if people in St. Louis start asking questions about those other governesses, about his business practices, about why he spent months hunting down one woman who embarrassed him, that reputation crumbles. Understanding dawned on Evelyn's face. You're giving us leverage. I'm giving you the truth, documented and official. What you do with it is up to you. Wade stood. Crow's staying at the hotel, been there since the hearing, drinking and complaining to anyone who'll listen. If you want to settle this, now's the time, before he regroups and brings in more lawyers. After Wade left, Gideon and Evelyn sat in silence for a long time. We should talk to him, Evelyn finally said. End this face to face. You sure? You don't owe him anything, least of all a conversation. I know, but I want to look him in the eye and tell him he lost. That for all his money and power, he couldn't break me. She stood, her posture straightening with decision. I spent months running, months afraid. I'm done being afraid of Victor Crow. They found him in the hotel saloon, sitting alone at a corner table with a bottle of expensive whiskey that looked mostly empty. He'd aged in the days since the hearing. New lines around his eyes, a hardness to his mouth that suggested he'd been grinding his teeth. When he saw them approach, hatred flashed across his face before he schooled it to cold contempt. Come to gloat, he asked. Come to offer you a choice, Evelyn said, sitting down across from him without being invited. Gideon remained standing, one hand resting on the back of her chair. Crow poured himself another drink. I'm not interested in choices from thieves? Then you're going to hate what I have to say. Evelyn laid Wade's report on the table. The marshal's investigation found that your evidence is forged, your witnesses are liars, your entire case is built on fabrications that won't survive scrutiny. That proves nothing. I'll bring in better lawyers, better experts. You'll bring in whoever you want. And while you're doing it, this report becomes public. Every newspaper in St. Louis gets a copy. Every judge, every business partner, every society matron who lunches with your wife. They all get to read about your history with governesses, about the pattern of abuse, about how you manufactured evidence to hunt down a woman who rejected you. Crow's hand tightened on his glass. You wouldn't dare. The scandal would destroy you too. I'm already destroyed in St. Louis. You saw to that. But you have something to lose. Your reputation, your business, your wife's willingness to keep pretending she doesn't know what kind of man she married. Evelyn's voice was steady, but Gideon could see the tremor in her hands. So here's the choice. You go back to St. Louis today. You tell everyone the charges were a misunderstanding, that new evidence exonerated me. You leave me alone for the rest of your life. In exchange, this report stays sealed. Your secrets stay secret. And if I refuse, then I spend every penny of that money I stole making sure everyone knows exactly who Victor Crow really is. I find those other governesses and I help them tell their stories. I burn your reputation to the ground and smile while I do it. They stared at each other across the table. Predator and prey reversed. The power dynamic shifted. Crow was still wealthy, still connected, still dangerous. But he was cornered now, and they both knew it. You've changed, Crow said finally. The frightened little governess who worked in my house wouldn't have dared talk to me like this. That governess didn't have anything left to lose. This version of me has everything worth fighting for. She stood. So what's it going to be? Crow drained his glass and stared at the table for a long moment. When he looked up, the hatred in his eyes was naked and raw. You'll regret this. Someday, somehow, you'll regret crossing me. Maybe, but it won't be today. Evelyn turned and walked out, her head high, her steps steady. Gideon followed, but paused at the door. One more thing, Crow. If you ever come near her again, if you send more men, more lawyers, more threats, I won't be as reasonable as she was. Mountain has a lot of places a man could disappear and never be found. Remember that. He left Crow sitting alone with his whiskey and his rage. Outside, Evelyn made it halfway down the street before her legs gave out. Gideon caught her, and she clung to him, shaking with adrenaline and relief and leftover fear. I did it, she gasped. I actually did it. You were magnificent. I was terrified. Doesn't make it less magnificent. He held her until the shaking stopped. Come on, let's go home. They left Iron Creek the next morning. Wade had confirmed that Crow checked out of the hotel before dawn, heading east with his lawyers and his wounded pride. The charges were officially dropped, the case closed. Evelyn Hale was a free woman. The ride up the mountain felt different this time. Not desperate flight or grim determination, but something closer to peace. The cabin appeared through the trees like a promise kept, smoke-stained and weathered, and exactly what they needed. I missed this place, Evelyn said, dismounting. How strange is that? I missed a tiny cabin in the middle of nowhere. Not strange at all. It's home. They settled back into their routines, but everything felt different now. Lighter somehow, like a weight they'd been carrying had finally been set down. Gideon's leg continued healing. Evelyn's hands had scarred, but remained strong. The mountain tested them with weather and wildlife and the thousand small dangers of isolation, but they faced it together. Winter deepened. Heavy snows came and went. They shared warmth by the fire, read books aloud, made love in the darkness, and talked until dawn. Life contracted to the space between the cabin walls, and somehow that felt exactly right. It was late February when Evelyn first suspected. She'd been sick in the mornings for a week, exhausted by mid-afternoon, emotional in ways that didn't match her personality. She'd noticed her body changing, subtle shifts that added up to something impossible and terrifying and wonderful. She told Gideon one night after dinner, the words coming out rushed and nervous. I think I'm pregnant. He went completely still. You're sure? Not completely, but all the signs are there. I'm maybe 2 months along. It happened probably around the time of the hearing or just after. The stress and everything, I didn't notice at first, but now... She stopped, reading his face. Say something. Gideon set down his coffee carefully, like he was afraid of breaking something. Then he crossed to her and knelt in front of her chair, taking her hands in his. I'm terrified, he said honestly. Childbirth up here with no doctor, no help, that's dangerous. We could lose you. We could lose the baby. We could lose everything we've built. I know. But I'm also... His voice broke. I'm so happy I can barely breathe. The thought of you carrying our child, of building a family here, of having something good come from all this. It's more than I ever let myself hope for. Evelyn was crying now, relief and fear mixing together. So we're doing this? Having a baby on a mountain in the middle of winter with no idea what we're doing? Seems like that's been our approach to everything so far. Why stop now? She laughed through her tears, and he pulled her into his arms, holding her while they both processed what this meant. The pregnancy progressed through late winter and into early spring. Evelyn's body changed in ways that fascinated and terrified them both. Gideon read every medical text he could find in Iron Creek, memorizing what to expect, what could go wrong, what to do in emergencies. He stocked up on supplies, prepared the cabin, built a cradle from pine wood that he sanded until it was smooth as glass. They made plans for what to do if complications arose, who to send for in Iron Creek, how to get Evelyn down the mountain if necessary, which herbs might help with pain or bleeding. But underlying all the planning was the knowledge that when labor came, they'd be mostly on their own. The baby was due in late August. By July, Evelyn was enormous and uncomfortable in counting the days. The summer heat made everything worse. She couldn't sleep, couldn't find a comfortable position, couldn't do half the work she was used to. I'm useless, she complained one evening, watching Gideon haul water alone. You're growing a human being. That's not useless. I can't even reach my own feet to put on boots, so I'll put them on for you. He knelt and helped her with her boots, then with standing, then with walking to the chair. You did this for me when my leg was broken, remember? Hauled me 3 miles through a blizzard. I can handle helping you with your boots. That was different. How? I don't know. It just was. But she was smiling. The first contraction hit on a morning in late August, just as the sun broke over the peaks. Evelyn woke gasping, her hand going to her swollen belly. Gideon, it's time. He'd been preparing for this moment for months, but all his planning evaporated the instant he saw the fear in her eyes. For a heartbeat, he froze. Seeing the war again, seeing all the ways this could go wrong, seeing another person he loved slipping away while he stood helpless. Then Evelyn grabbed his hand. Hey, look at me. We can do this. Together, remember? He took a breath, pushing down the panic. Together. Right, okay. He helped her to the bed, gathered the supplies they'd prepared. How close are the contractions? That was the first. Could be hours still. It was. Hour after hour of waiting, of Evelyn pacing when she could and lying down when the pain got too intense. Gideon stayed with her, offering water, rubbing her back, counting contractions. Outside, the day progressed, morning to afternoon to evening, while inside the cabin they fought their own private battle. As night fell, the contractions intensified. Evelyn was exhausted, drenched in sweat, her face pale with pain and effort. Gideon had delivered foals and calves before, knew the basics of birth. But this was different. This was Evelyn. This was everything. I can't, she gasped during a particularly bad contraction. I can't do this anymore. You can. You're the strongest person I know. You're lying. I'm really not. He pressed a cool cloth to her forehead. You dragged me through a blizzard. You faced down Crow in front of the whole town. You can do this. What if something goes wrong? What if... Then we handle it. Whatever comes, we handle it. But right now, you need to push. Can you do that? She could. For another hour, she pushed while Gideon coached and supported and prayed to anything that might be listening that they'd both come through this alive. Then just after midnight, a baby's cry split the air. Gideon caught the tiny, slippery, impossibly fragile human and stared at it in wonder. A boy. Small but healthy-looking, furious at being born, screaming his rage at the world. Is he... Evelyn's voice was weak but urgent. He's perfect. He's absolutely perfect. Gideon cleaned the baby carefully, wrapped him in the soft blanket they'd prepared, and placed him in Evelyn's arms. She looked down at their son, and something in her face transformed. All the fear and pain melted into pure love. Hello, little one. We've been waiting for you. The baby quieted at her voice, his tiny fist curling around her finger. Gideon sat beside them on the bed, his arm around Evelyn, his other hand resting gently on his son's back. They stayed like that for a long time, the three of them, while the mountains stood silent outside and a new life began inside the cabin. We should name him, Evelyn said eventually. Do you have any ideas? Gideon had been thinking about this for months. James, if that's all right with you, for my brother. Evelyn looked up at him, understanding in her eyes. James Hale. I love it. Yeah? Yeah. She kissed him softly. Your brother would be proud. Of you, of this, of all of it. Maybe he would have been. Gideon liked to think so. Liked to think that somewhere James was laughing at the absurdity of his scarred, damaged older brother becoming a father. The first weeks were brutal. James cried constantly, needed feeding every few hours, slept in short bursts that left Gideon and Evelyn stumbling through the days like drunks. They took turns walking him, rocking him, singing half-remembered songs from their childhoods. But there were moments of perfect clarity, too. The first time James smiled, the way he'd calm when he heard Evelyn's voice. The night Gideon woke to find his son gripping his finger with surprising strength, blue eyes staring up at him with infant gravity. I'm going to mess this up, Gideon confessed one night, holding James while Evelyn slept. I don't know how to be a father. I barely know how to be a person. But James just made a small sound and kept holding his finger, and somehow that was enough. As autumn arrived and James grew stronger, they settled into new rhythms. Evelyn healed slowly, regaining her strength. Gideon learned to work the trapline one-handed while carrying his son in a sling. They taught James about the mountain in baby talk and lullabies, introducing him to wind and snow and endless sky. One afternoon in October, riders appeared on the trail. Gideon grabbed his rifle instinctively, but Evelyn recognized one of them. It's Marshal Wade. The marshal dismounted, looking tired but pleased. Mr. and Mrs. Hale, hope I'm not intruding. Not at all, Evelyn said, stepping out with James in her arms. What brings you all the way up here? Wade smiled at the baby. Congratulations, first of all. Handsome boy. Thank you. This is James. Good name. Wade's expression turned serious. I came to deliver news. Victor Crow is dead. The words hung in the cold air. Gideon felt Evelyn tense beside him. What happened? She asked quietly. Heart gave out, according to the doctors. Dropped dead in his office 2 weeks ago. His business partners are fighting over the empire. His wife's contesting the will. The whole thing's a mess. Wade pulled out a document. But before he died, he signed this. Official statement withdrawing all charges against you, admitting the evidence was fabricated, clearing your name completely. Evelyn took the document with shaking hands. Why would he do that? Can't say for certain. Maybe his conscience caught up with him at the end. Maybe his wife forced him to make things right. Maybe he just wanted to tie up loose ends before he died. Wade shrugged. Does it matter? You're free. Completely and officially free. No one's looking for you. No charges hanging over your head. It's over. Over. The word felt strange. They'd lived with the threat of Crow for so long that his absence left a hole in their understanding of the world. Thank you, Evelyn managed, for everything you did, for believing us. Was just doing my job. But you're welcome. Wade tipped his hat. I'll leave you folks to your life. You've earned the peace. After he left, Gideon and Evelyn stood together outside the cabin, James between them, watching the marshal disappear down the trail. It's really over, Evelyn said. It is. I thought I'd feel different, relieved maybe, or happy, but mostly I just feel tired. Tired, she agreed. Tired and ready to stop fighting. Then we stop. We just live. They went inside and for the first time in longer than either could remember, they let themselves simply exist. No planning for the next crisis. No watching over their shoulders. No fear of what tomorrow might bring. Just life. Simple, hard, beautiful life on a mountain far from everywhere that mattered. The years passed the way years do in places like this, slowly and all at once. James grew from infant to toddler to boy, learning to walk on the same floors where his parents had learned to love each other. He was quick and curious and fearless in ways that terrified Gideon and delighted Evelyn. They taught him to read using the books Evelyn had brought from St. Louis, taught him to track and hunt and respect the mountain that was his home, taught him that strength meant protecting people weaker than yourself, and that real courage was choosing kindness when cruelty would be easier. The cabin expanded. Gideon added a room for James, then a covered porch, then a small barn for the animals. The place that had been a survival box became a home, filled with James's laughter and Evelyn's singing and the quiet satisfaction of work well done. Iron Creek changed too. The town grew, became more civilized, less wild. But the Hales remained constants, the mountain family that came down twice a year for supplies and gossip, that everyone knew by reputation but few knew well. People spoke of them, of course. The scarred trapper and the woman he'd married sight unseen, who'd faced down a powerful man and built a life from nothing. The stories grew in the telling, became legend, until it was hard to separate truth from myth. But the truth was simpler and more complicated than any story. The truth was two broken people who'd chosen each other when they had nothing, who'd fought together when fighting was all that was left, who'd built something worth protecting from the ruins of their separate pasts. The truth was that love, real love, wasn't about being perfect. It was about showing up for each other when everything was falling apart. About pulling each other through storms, literal and metaphorical. About choosing connection over safety, vulnerability over armor, hope over the easier comfort of despair. One spring evening, when James was 7 and Evelyn was pregnant again, and Gideon's leg only ached in bad weather, they sat together on the porch, watching the sunset paint the peaks gold and purple. "Do you ever regret it?" Evelyn asked. "Answering that advertisement? Bringing a stranger up here?" Gideon thought about the man he'd been before she arrived, hollow, damaged, waiting to die. Thought about everything they'd been through, all the fear and pain and desperate struggle. "Not for a second," he said. "You?" "Not even half a second." She leaned against his shoulder. "Though I do sometimes wonder who I would have become if I'd made different choices. If I'd stayed in St. Louis, or run somewhere else, or never stolen that money. You'd have been someone else. Maybe someone happy. But not this person. Not James's mother. Not my wife." "True." She watched James chasing the dog through the clearing, his laughter echoing. "I like this person better." "Me too." They sat in comfortable silence until James ran up, breathless and dirty and grinning. "Papa, tell me the story again about how you and Mama met. You've heard it 100 times. I want to hear it again." So Gideon told it, about the advertisement and the letter and the frightened woman who'd stepped off a stage with shredded hands and courage that wouldn't quit. about storms and bears and men with guns, about learning to trust when trust seemed impossible, about love that grew in the spaces between survival and surrender. He told it the way he always did, honestly, without embellishment, acknowledging the fear and the mistakes alongside the moments of grace, because that's what the story deserved. Not a fairy tale with easy answers, but the truth of two people who'd fought their way to something worth keeping. James listened raptly, even though he knew every word. When Gideon finished, the boy asked the question he always asked. "And you lived happily ever after?" Gideon and Evelyn exchanged a look. They'd discussed this, what to tell their son about happy endings in reality. "We lived," Gideon said carefully. "Some days were happy, some were hard. We lost people we loved and carried scars that never fully healed. But we faced it together, and that made even the hard days worth living." Is that better than happily ever after? I think so, because ever after is a long time, and nobody's happy every single day. But if you can find someone who'll stand with you through the bad days, who'll pull you from ravines and face down your demons, and choose you even when it's difficult, that's worth more than any fairy tale. James considered this with the seriousness of children who haven't yet learned to doubt what their parents tell them. "I'm glad Mama came here, even if it was hard." "Me too, buddy, me too." As darkness fell and they went inside, Gideon paused at the door to look back at the mountain. The same peaks that had nearly killed him, that had given him shelter, that had witnessed every moment of their unlikely story. The mountain didn't care about their struggles or victories. It just existed, vast and indifferent and eternal. But that was okay, because within its shadow, Gideon Hale had learned something that war and grief had tried to destroy. He'd learned that survival wasn't the same as living, that love wasn't weakness, but the only thing strong enough to redeem the worst in us. That second chances existed for people brave enough to reach for them, even when reaching hurt. The mountain hadn't given him these lessons easily. Nothing up here came easy. But that was the point, wasn't it? The things worth having, love, family, home, they required fighting for, required showing up day after day, even when exhaustion and fear screamed for surrender. Evelyn appeared beside him, James already inside and getting ready for bed. "You all right?" she asked. "Yeah, just thinking." "About?" "About how close I came to never knowing this, never knowing you. If I'd burned that letter instead of sending the money. If you'd changed your mind about coming, if any of 100 things had gone differently." She took his hand. "But they didn't. We found each other, Gideon. Against all odds and common sense, we found each other. Best mistake I ever made." "Me too." They stood together in the doorway, balanced between the wilderness outside and the warmth inside, and Gideon understood that this was what happiness looked like. Not perfection, not the absence of struggle, just moments of peace hard-won from chaos, shared with someone who'd seen you at your worst and chosen to stay anyway. Behind them, James called out for his bedtime story. Inside, the fire crackled and the cabin held back the night. Above, stars wheeled in their ancient patterns across the massive sky. And in that moment, on that mountain, Gideon Hale was exactly where he belonged. With Evelyn, with James, with the family they'd built from desperation and determination and love that refused to quit even when quitting would have been easier. The mountain would test them again. Life would bring more storms, more struggles, more losses. But they'd face those challenges the way they'd faced everything else, together, stubborn, unbroken. Because that's what love meant, up here at the edge of the world. It meant surviving. And then, when survival wasn't enough, it meant building something beautiful from the ruins. They went inside and closed the door on the darkness, safe in their small fortress against the infinite night. And if the cabin walls could have spoken, they would have told a simple truth that no amount of money or power could buy. Sometimes the bravest thing you can do is let someone see you, all of you. The scars and the damage and the parts you're ashamed of. And sometimes, if you're incredibly lucky, they'll look at all that brokenness and say, "You're worth fighting for." That was Gideon and Evelyn's story. Not a fairy tale, not perfect, but real and true and theirs. And high above the world, where the air was thin and the cold was brutal and survival was never guaranteed, that was more than enough. It was everything.